Good evening. Welcome to tonight's program. I'm Kelly Wright. I'm glad you could join us for the next hour as we focus on COVID-19 and its impact on all of the communities in the United States and the world. But for our purposes, we're going to drill down on what it means to African Americans and people of color. So let me get right to my opening observations. Let me read for you my observations based upon what I've seen taking place today in the Senate hearings with Dr. Anthony Fauci and three of the other top health experts on the president's coronavirus task force. Here's what I noted. Senator Mitt Romney watched the daily coronavirus task force briefings all along, like many of us do, and he finds that our testing record with 80,000 deaths right now is nothing to celebrate over. Also, there were Democrats and Republicans all saying in bipartisanship fashion, stating we need to get better at testing and contact tracing. And Dr. Anthony Fauci made it quite clear that we're getting better, but we've got to do better. He is cautiously optimistic about getting a vaccine within a year or two. He's cautiously optimistic. And the administration has promised a lot of things, the senators pointed out, but have failed so far to deliver on all of them. Dr. Fauci again stating that as states continue to reopen, he is concerned that more cases of coronavirus will surge.
Right.
My opening observations look at it one way. Are we doing too much too quickly and not looking at life as being the priceless commodity that we all should enjoy? So joining me now to weigh in on this is Dr. Yolandra Hancock. She is a pediatrician. She is also part of the Milken Institute on Public Health at George Washington University. And Doc, it was a riveting testimony from the top four, the Fab Four, if you will, of the health team as it relates to the president's coronavirus task force. But at the end of the day, many people are still saying, why then are we opening states when there's still a lot of mixed messaging going on at the White House?
Right. I think it speaks to what has happened throughout the pandemic, where no matter what the evidence demonstrates, either federally or locally, our leaders are going to do what they want. And it isn't always informed based on the data that presents itself to them. Instead, it's based on economic impact and economic decisions, not based on life consequences and risk of furthering the spread of COVID-19.
And certainly this is a time, as Dr. Anthony Fauci and the other medical experts agreed to, this is not a time for politics.
Right.
And the senators agreed with that. Only one of the senators really talked about the political nature of it and talked about her being in favor of the president's plan. But every senator, Republican and Democrat alike, I should point out, were basically stating we cannot afford to get this wrong. 80,000 people have died thus far, and we cannot go around celebrating or gathering evidence that, or gathering information that our testing is far superior to other nations, when in fact, it has not been good.
Right. Absolutely. One, this isn't a competition. Like, there is no winner in a pandemic. There are examples of what to do and what not to do. And countries like South Korea set an excellent example. Senator Romney mentioned it. Senator Kaine mentioned it. There are exemplars, but again, this is not a competition. And it certainly isn't a time to try to hunt and search for what we're doing right. It's a matter of understanding where our missteps have been, the fact that we have not listened to our scientists and our experts in the way that we should, so that as we move through this pandemic and states decide to open up against the recommendations of our nation's top specialists, that we at least have a how in terms of how to do it. Making sure that we have the testing, the PPE in order to protect our front line. I think of Senator Roberts, right? He's a Republican, but he spoke to the impact that this pandemic is having on our food supply chain and the risk that that by itself is posing to the American people, that we're still struggling to protect those who are on the front line.
And quite a few of the senators pointed out what was happening to the children, stating
Right.
that something has to be done about this COVID-19 in total, because we still don't understand why it's impacting the children. And that's something we have to be on the lookout for. You're a pediatrician. Tell me your concerns based on what you heard today at the Senate hearing and how it relates to the children?
There's several concerns that I have. One, in terms of testing, right? We're talking about returning our children to school as early as July or August. But if we do not have testing in place, some form of protocol in order to assess whether or not a child is at risk or at risk for spreading COVID-19, it makes no sense to have a return to school conversation. So that's part of my concern. The second part of my concern are the studies, right? Are they looking at the pediatric population as it relates to treatments or in terms of the vaccine, when we're now seeing that our children are impacted in a multi-system way? Most importantly, their hearts are being threatened by COVID-19. I need to know, both as a pediatrician, but even more importantly, as a mother who has a child who will be going to school in the fall, what are you doing to protect my daughter? And then third, what are the provisions in place for students if we end up having to go back to distance learning? One of the senators, I believe it was Senator Cassidy, who asked a very poignant question. How do you balance between decreasing the risk of transmission among children versus the impact that it has on the developing brains in creating this distance learning space? There's a lot to consider, but my prayer, honestly, is that these folks in power are considering our children as important as they are considering the economy.
Amen to that. Dr. Yolanda Hancock, thank you for weighing in. I know it's been a busy day for you, as it has for all of us, but I thank you for weighing in on this. We're not done with this issue yet, as we've seen. And as you stated before, we have got to be careful and really take our time with this.
Yes.
As they say a lot of times, pump the brakes, Sparky. We got a long way to go.
Exactly.
All right. Dr. Yolanda Hancock, thank you so much.
My pleasure.
We'll be back with more of the program after this. So welcome back to the program. Joining me now is Pastor Reginald Bacchus. He is the associate pastor at Abyssinian Baptist Church there in Harlem, New York. He is also the leader of the 400 Foundation. And Pastor, this is an important time because we've seen what happened just moments ago, actually a couple of hours ago, if you will, at the Senate hearing where Dr. Anthony Fauci and some of the other top three leaders of the president's coronavirus task force have stated that this is an ill-fated time if we reopen too soon ahead of the testing and contact tracing that we need. And Dr. Fauci and some of the senators, bipartisan on both sides of the aisle, Republican, Democrat, were also expressing some concerns about the minority community and communities at risk of the COVID-19 pandemic. I'm just curious, your reaction to what we're seeing, because we're getting a lot of mixed messages out of Washington, and yet it's very clear by these health experts that the country is not ready for full reopening, particularly a place like New York.
Yeah, I mean, it is a, first of all, thank you for this opportunity to be here to speak on such an important issue, Mr. Wright. You know, I think it is emblematic of the selfishness that has begun to overrun the country, where economic interests are ruling the day as opposed to practicing an abundance of caution and caring about individuals' lives. One question I posed to someone I was having a debate with: if you could put a price tag on a life, you know, how much would that cost? And they were unable to articulate a price. And I think if we translated it to those particular issues and asked that question, we understand the economic urgency now, but we also saw they're talking about doing a $3 trillion, spending package, which is fascinating to me. But right now, speaking on behalf of New York and communities of color, it is of great concern if we reopen too soon. We have seen the disproportionate impact on African-American and Latino communities. And some have suggested that to open prematurely is to just further disadvantage people of color, because the reality is, when you think about the medical industry, when you think about a lot of the frontline workers, when you think about hospitality, restaurants, the businesses that will be open, a large part of the employees are, people of color. We have not had adequate testing to ensure that we're sending people back who have already contracted it and are demonstrating the antibodies. So they're just a morass of issues that we think need to be further deliberated on, and a real actionable plan comes out of it that is not driven by the selfish economic incentive and motive, but has the compassion that we have come to. We don't always get it, but we certainly still maintain that as a standard.
You know, you mentioned compassion, and you remind me of the fact that for the least of these, which is the greatest act of compassion, that you're always concerned about those who are on the lower rung of the economic ladder and the health ladder. I'm curious to know your reaction to or response to Governor Andrew Cuomo, who today stated that when you start rolling out another stimulus package, make sure Congress, make sure, Mr. President, that it is a stimulus package that will benefit the least of these, the people who really need it, and not the multi-million-dollar corporations, and not some of your favorite pork in your state, but getting right to the heart of the matter. And that's to the people who need it most, which in the case of Abyssinian right there in Harlem, it's the Black and brown people who live in the community and are those frontline essential workers.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, absolutely. You know, we are concerned. There's a difference between a stimulus package and a stipend for those who don't need it, right? If this was as articulated by Congress in the legislative language of the CARES Act, that it was supposed to focus on not-for-profits, houses of worship, and small businesses. And you saw the blurring of lines of what qualified as a small business when you look at major retail franchises, national chains. Some of them obviously have given it back, but it just demonstrates on the banking side, heard calls, just contextualizing this. We were preparing churches and houses of worship, not-for-profits, a week before the portal actually opened to apply. Come to find out that banks were calling their largest business customers, pre-qualifying them, walking them through so that they were at the front of the queue as soon as the portal opened. So we can understand full-heartedly why the money went as fast as it did, because there was a priority for those who didn't necessarily need it the most. So how that translates here in the community, we already had many businesses that were struggling month to month to survive. This was as we get into the warmer months in New York. You know, New York is a great place to be when the sun is shining. There's so much to do, from the parks to the restaurants to sidewalk cafes. But just imagine the anticipation of those businesses who really depend on this season to help them sustain the low months. But when you remove that from the equation, you can see how they are detrimentally impacted. On top of that, the federal package that was designed to give them a lifeline actually ended up turning to be a dream deferred, as we've seen time and time again. I have heard some that are getting it in the second and third round, but for many, it's coming a little bit too late when you look at rent, when you look at utilities, when you look at overhead. Just the cost of insurance is a major issue. And a lot of those things were not factored in to the equation when they decided how to roll out this package. So we are excited to hear from Governor Cuomo and other legislative leaders that there is a new consideration for how this will be rolled out. But what we realize wholeheartedly is that it has to be intentional. It has to be strategic. It cannot just be a blanket windfall for anyone who applies, but there needs to be some intentionality in how they target those dollars to the most hard-hit communities, because those hard-hit communities will need the most to overcome this current pandemic.
Well said, and you said something very key, Pastor Backus, and that was that some are receiving it in the second and third term, which goes to the governor of New York's point about all should be receiving it, because this economic downturn is no one's fault. This virus has hit everybody. And why can't the federal government admit, hey, we got caught flat-footed on this, let's get it together, instead of sending out these mixed messages? Because even at the end of today's Senate hearing, we still had no consensus on where we're going in terms of reopening. There's Admiral Girard, who was basically stating that we could have 40 to 50 million testing done per month by September, speaking in the affirmation of having schools reopen. And yet some of the senators in a bipartisan fashion said, we simply are not ready. And no one said it better than I think Senator Mitt Romney and Senator Elizabeth Warren, who both stated we're simply not ready. We can do better, must do better, but it, pardon my pun, ain't getting done. What do we need to do?
Well, there's an expression that still waters run deep, right?
Mm.
And it's to warn you before you wade out into a water or any body of water and you don't know how low the bottom is. You're putting yourself at risk. And I think we're at that same place right now. I don't know that it's been conclusively determined once you've contracted COVID-19, if it morphs into a new strand, are you once again susceptible to that? There's been a lot of starts and stops on the testing, the FDA approval process. A large majority of those tests were faulty, came back inconclusive. So when you talk about disadvantaging individuals, sending them back to school and the testing, why it's so important, Monday night, I have a radio show. I was having a conversation with some tenant leaders at Taft houses, Senator Taft houses, and one of the other developments here. I'm sorry, I just finished final, so just kind of getting back to earth. But one of the things that they said that was challenging is even the response from the state government, where they gave them hand sanitizer. They gave it to them in gallon jars with no smaller containers, no pumps. They also gave them enough for 1 to 2 masks per unit. Now, in 1,500 units in Taft houses, what they told me is we have families with as many as 7 people, and so many people have begun to come together. So let's play this out. So you don't have adequate testing. You're sending children back into school without the assurance that they have either contracted it, developed the antibodies. So you make them susceptible, who they then bring it back home. Because of our socioeconomic situation, quarantining is a matter of privilege, right? It's a privilege to be able to quarantine. Most people do not have that ability. So you are wading into waters when you don't know how deep they are, without adequate testing, without a strategic plan. We've seen some language about a rollout in different phases. But again, it only works if there is regional participation, regional cooperation, and then, there has to be a concerted effort to ensure we've checked all the boxes. Do we have adequate testing? Right. Have we secured the resource to be able to quarantine people once they are determined that they have it? What happens then if they don't have anywhere to go when they don't have the ability to quarantine? So there's just a lot of issues, a lot of challenges that need to be worked through, and I think we need to practice an abundance of caution.
And that, my friend, is an inspirational note to end on, because all I can say to you is keep on with the faith, keep on keeping it on. I'm here for you, and if I could be there, I'd be there shouldering it with you. You know how much I love New York, and Harlem being one of my favorite places. Pastor Reginald Bacchus, associate pastor at Abyssinian Baptist. It's a famous church doing some famous things in the community. Not just in Harlem, but all around the New York area. Thank you for coming on the program and sharing your insights, and keep me up to date on the testing. We'd like to actually see some examples of that and try to get the word out.
I hope to be in line tomorrow morning, so I'll let you know.
All right.
All right.
Thank you. God bless you, man.
Yes.
Welcome back to the program. So now we want to talk about strengthening the family. Why? Because it's important. Because if we make our families stronger, thereby we'll make our community stronger. So joining me is Nikissa Craig. She is a licensed clinical social worker based in Virginia. And Nikissa, it's always good to have you on the show. And today we're talking about the things that we're dealing with in our families, and that's post-traumatic stress syndrome. And a lot of people, they don't even recognize the signs of this kind of trauma and the pain it can cause, not so much in the immediate future, but down the line. Can you bring us up to date on how we can detect these signs, and first of all, why it exists in this COVID-19 new normal?
Well, first of all, thank you for having me back. And it's such a great topic, because typically when we're thinking about the issue of trauma, we're thinking about a post reaction, right? So we're typically thinking about something that has already happened and we're seeing the effects afterwards. But one of the critical differences with living through the pandemic is that the trauma is actually ongoing. It's showing up in our daily lives. And so that adds an additional layer of complexity to what we're all experiencing.
You know, that really says something, because that means it's kind of perpetuating.
Absolutely.
So how do we step in and block that kind of trauma, which if we don't address it, seems to me like it could mushroom into something bigger and far worse?
Absolutely. And I think you're spot on. I think a lot of us, especially as mental health professionals, are really bracing ourselves for some of the effects that will come months and months after we start to reopen, and the full effects of the devastation begin to be felt. So right now we're on the beginning end, which is difficult to really wrap your mind around as we all look around and we've been self-quarantining for weeks at this point. But you're exactly correct. So in this moment, we're hearing stories about, the anxiety and the stress of simply going to the grocery store. The stress of walking outside and not knowing if you're being exposed or if you're exposing others. And it's extremely difficult to have a triggering experience on a daily basis. And so one of the first things that you want to look at is really being willing to tell your story. So a lot of times when we're overwhelmed, we will tend to isolate ourselves potentially. We'll tend to sort of shut down because we're just overwhelmed with the emotions that may come with expressing how we feel. And so what you want to be looking out for, if you're, someone who is quarantining with a family member or someone who's connected to someone, is maybe taking a look and seeing, have they gone kind of silent? Have they seemed distant or different? Because we really want to be mindful that we don't shut down and begin to self-isolate and some of the stress that's coming. I'm hearing from family members that they're experiencing extremely high levels of loneliness. I'm hearing that from couples as well. So even within family units, parents who are really struggling with balancing schooling and their work are reporting having a lot of issues with feeling just alone in carrying the weight of all of that daily.
That's quite a burden to carry. I'd like you to stay with me, because on the other side of the break, I'd like to ask you advice for these families that are feeling alone, and even the individuals that might be a son or a daughter who just really needs to reach out because they're going through maybe the cusp or on the cusp of depression. So I'd like to come back and have you talk about how we can address these traumas that go on in our life in the midst of this pandemic. I'm talking to Nikessa Craig, a licensed clinical social worker. We'll be back with more of the program with her right after this. Welcome back to the program. So I'm talking to Nikessa Craig. She's a licensed clinical social worker. She's been appearing on our program 2 times a week to help strengthen our families. It's such an important thing that you're doing, Nikessa, to help families understand that in the midst of this COVID-19 pandemic, they can get through this together as a family unit. But as you were pointing out just a few moments ago in our previous segment, when people are going through post-traumatic stress syndrome, they may not recognize the signs. And the one thing you pointed out was the loneliness, and that feeds into it, does it not?
Absolutely. So it's hard to really compartmentalize and unpack some of the layers, right, that we're carrying with us. Because some of us had stress and overwhelm and issues related to trauma and stress before the pandemic hit. And so for a lot of people, they feel uncertain about, to what level do I need to really struggle with this? is my struggle really valid in the midst of comparisons, right? Because so there's this issue sometimes with what we call comparative suffering, where a lot of us are experiencing the losses from the pandemic economically, socially, emotionally, but we tend to think about others who may have it worse than we do. And so with that processing, sometimes we start to minimize our own discomfort and suffering. And you really want to avoid that. You want to really create a space where it's okay for you to be struggling as well, where your feelings are just as valid. And you want to create a space where you're willing to address it and handle it.
You're saying create a space so that people can handle it. What if they don't recognize it? How can we as family members, if we see it or sense that something is amiss, and that individual family member might be dipping into a discouragement and then perhaps into a depression, a PTSD, post-traumatic stress syndrome, what can we do to help strengthen that family member and pull them in?
It's a really good question. So you want to look for signs, right? Signs that this person is just being different, because some people are what we call retreaters, and that they kind of go into their shells. And then some people tend to externalize, where we may actually see more emotion from them, where maybe there's more irritability, more anger, more frustration, or they're saying things that they typically wouldn't say. You know, my world is completely upside down. I feel like I'm losing it. You want to pay attention to those things. Secondly, I would just have a conversation. Sometimes, and I get this, we just don't know what to say. We don't know how to support the person. We don't want to offend them. We don't want to judge them. But there's power in our response. And where that power comes from is sitting down and having a very calm conversation with them and being specific about what you're observing. Being able to say, hey, I've noticed that this was something you did and it's changed. Is everything okay? For those of us that don't have people, you know, in the home to actually sit down and have the conversation, see if you can get on a Zoom meeting, a Skype meeting, a phone call. Be direct as possible with the conversation, but you want to leave the judgment out of it, right? So you want to be able to say, I have noticed this change. Are you okay? You don't want to embed your assumptions and all this stuff that you've read online into it. That can be overwhelming, and it can put the other person on defense. But the first line is the communication, and how we communicate goes a long way in helping someone to really come to terms with the fact that they may be suffering. And as a mental health professional, one of my issues is that people choose to suffer way too long. It's not necessary.
Wow, that right there is that's very thought provoking and eye opening. That some people suffer way too long when they can take it to a friend who can help them. And for those who are perhaps looking at it from not a judgmental standpoint, but perhaps saying, I don't know what to do. When does it reach a level that they need to reach out to a professional like yourself to deal with a mental health issue, if it's themselves or if it's a family member?
Right. So when it comes to suffering, I would err on the side of caution. So you don't always have to have a diagnosable mental health condition to really get some help. You know, counseling at a very basic level is just about exploring. It's exploring your emotions, exploring your experiences. There doesn't have to be this heavy, significant toll that's been taking place. And actually, you want to err on the side of prevention. You don't want to get into a crisis and then reach out. You want to be dealing with things as they happen. And so I hope that that's a part of the discourse that really changes over time when we look at what counseling is really there for. But I would also say it's really, really important, should you find yourself just unable to be as productive, just as, you know, capable of really being able to communicate and express yourself, being disinterested in things that you would typically enjoy, those are warning signs that something really does need to be done sooner or later.
How can we reach you and contact you if someone's watching this and they say, hey, I'd like to get more advice from you?
So definitely reach out. I tell people, if I am not able to actually help guide you. I'm going to get you where you need to go. I'm at Whole Journey. That's wholejourneywellness.com. And we're also on Instagram at Whole Journey Counseling.
Nikessa, I appreciate you being on the program so often with such great advice on how we can make our families stronger. Because let's face it, if we fail to strengthen our families during this time, this heightened time of need, then we may have more trouble beyond the pandemic than we ever realized. So thanks for pointing out the things that we can help each other out with. It's so important to have you on. We'll have you back on again Thursday. Looking forward to it. Nikessa Craig, licensed clinical social worker right here, and she will help you have a whole positive journey. Trust me. We'll be back with more of the program after this. Welcome back to the program. So joining me tonight is a lovely young lady who is an entrepreneur, and we're going to hear her story. And it's timely because in this age of COVID-19, it's so refreshing when you can just know that there's an entrepreneur who makes a great bottle of wine.
And I do really good cocktails too. I'm getting better at my cocktail game since I've been home during COVID as well.
Well, Judia, it's good to have you on the show. Judia Black, and I love your name, first of all, and I love the name of your company. You're going to help me pronounce it the French way. It is?
Enjoie.
Enjoie.
It's like,
because I would look at it and say enjoy.
Joie.
Joie, enjoie.
Joie de vivre.
Okay. Tell me about your company and how in the midst of this COVID-19 disruption that we're seeing, in terms of our health and even our wealth, you have been able to continue on because some of the things that you instituted prior to the pandemic.
So Enjoie is a lifestyle media and events company. And I founded the company in 2008. I founded the company because I was a former marketing executive who had taken time off to start a family. And I was pretty much tied to the house with my children most of the time. I had some part-time, I had some help from time to time, but I didn't have live-in help like some people. And I didn't have enough money to just like be a lady who lunch and go, get on boards and, that sort of thing. So I had to find a way to keep myself stimulated and occupied while I was at home and also entertained. And I love food. I come from the South. I'm originally from Atlanta, and I come from a family that really enjoys and takes our meals very seriously. We enjoy cooking. We enjoy having company over, the whole Southern hospitality thing. And that was kind of my, I would say my export to New York. And a lot of people here go out to eat, go out to dinner a lot. I'm one of the few people who actually likes to stay at home and cook and have friends over.
In New York City, no less.
Yeah. So it was fun for me. I would have a lot of my girlfriends would come over and just, either moms that have had children the same age, we would rotate around each other's houses and have dinner together so we could still have some adult company, but watch our children. And then even some of my single friends would come over just because they knew I was making a good meal, and we chat. And so, it kept me company while I was at home raising my children. And then I just decided to, a few people started asking me about, back up. Then I decided I was into wine, but I didn't know that much about it. And I had a few friends who were into wine. I had lived in California for a while where, wine is a big product. But mostly I knew about California wine. And then when I moved to New York, a lot of people were drinking wines from different parts of the world. And so I became interested in learning more about the whole global wine scene. And I went to get a sommelier certificate at with the American Sommelier Association. So that's really what launched Enjoie. After I was doing that as a hobby, I was collecting wine and having dinners and pairing the wines. And then I thought, this isn't a niche business, like do wine tasting events for people and help people do this in their homes or in business corporations. I did some, I started off just like putting an auction in the school, in the nursery school, putting up, what did I call? I put a wine tasting event in the nursery school auction.
Okay.
And, you know, some people bid on it. And that was my first real, like, official launch of my company. And then, you know, I was able to use them as a reference, and that gave me the ability to market myself to other people. Did a lot of donations in the beginning, you know, to get people to just try it out. And then by word of mouth, I started getting people who would actually pay me. And then I had a few business school friends who helped me get some corporate clients. So I did a few events to, you know, educate some of the younger associates and summer interns on wine appreciation. And that's kind of how it took off.
That's fantastic, Judy. And look, I know it hasn't, we're talking about the success of your company, but I know it hasn't always been easy, especially during this heightened time of sadness and unfortunate death because of coronavirus right there in New York City. So I'd like you to stay with me, because on the other end of the break, we want to talk about some of those times of testing and trials that you've been through, because I think it's also important for people to know that while you're successful as an entrepreneur and business owner, life still causes disruptions and causes pain, and we have to exercise faith to get through it. So coming back on the opposite end of this break, we'll be talking to Judy Black, owner of Enjoy, and we'll have much more of her story right after this. Welcome back to the program. So as you know, it's all about strengthening the family here on the program. And one of the ways to strengthen family is by making sure that we're individually and collectively going strong and getting stronger, even in the midst of a global pandemic that is weakening our immune systems and causing death and problems. And Judy Black is a successful business owner there in New York City. The epicenter of the coronavirus that we've all been focusing on, and then of course in the other states throughout the country. But Judy, it has not been an easy task for you, even though you have a successful business. There has been a trail of tears as well throughout the pain that we're all experiencing from this pandemic.
You know, I just read a quote yesterday that it really struck me. And it said, you know, a ship can sail in a whole sea of water and not sink unless the water gets inside the ship. Similarly, you know, in life, we have to look at it like that. Like we can be surrounded by all kinds of pessimism and gloom and negativity, but we can't internalize it too much and let it like get the best of us. See the positive, you know, and find something positive in that environment, and protect ourselves, you know, from letting that seep into us. And that's not always easy. Sometimes it's easier said than done. So one of the things that I do talk about, I feel like my company is about spirit. I call it inspired. I say what I do is inspired entertaining, because I do really try to teach people also along the way. If you ever look at my social media posts, my blog posts, and my newsletters, a lot of times I'll start them off with a quote, and it typically tends to be an inspirational quote, because I believe life is, you know, like enjoying life is about, a lot of it is about attitude. And, you know, we have to just try to keep a good attitude no matter how bad things get.
Well, Judah, thank you for being on the program tonight and showing us that, you know, you make it look good because your company is successful. But it's also good to know the story behind the success. And I think everything that you've stated has helped not only women, but also men who are right now experiencing maybe unemployment. They're wondering what to do. And the advice that you've given us is, what's in your hand? What's your talent? What's your gift?
Play the hand you're dealt.
Yep. play the hand you're dealt, and bloom where you're planted. Judea Black, thank you. And I like the reference to Judea, beautiful part of Israel. If anyone gets a chance to go there, they should definitely visit also the Judean desert, just Judea itself. It's just a fantastic place. And you've got a fantastic company. So anytime you want to come on, and especially when we get out of this COVID-19, we'll get together and we'll sample.
Sounds good. Yeah, we should do a wine tasting together. I'm going to send you a bottle in the meantime.
Oh, absolutely. I welcome that. Thank you so much.
Yeah.
God bless you and keep the spirit thriving. How do we reach you?
Well, you can reach me at enjoy.com, ENJOIE.com. Also on Facebook, Instagram, Pinterest, and Twitter. I'm Enjoy Life, at ENJOIELIFE. On YouTube, I'm Judea Black.
Excellent. Judea Black, enjoying life through Enjoy. We'll be back with more of the show after this. Welcome back, and now for my final word. As we talked about at the top of this program, we saw an exceptional Senate hearing today in which a bipartisan consensus gathered around Republican and Democrat senators to listen to the health experts talk about the science of COVID-19 and not the politics of COVID-19. The bottom line is this: we as a nation must learn to get over our hangups. Let's hang up our hangups and drill down to really reach out to everybody in need of getting through this COVID-19 together. Having said that, we should be mindful of the fact of the golden rule: do unto others as you would have them do unto you. So let's continue to focus on the least of these, those who are hard hit by this coronavirus. And let's see how we as leaders in the Senate, the House, the White House, the church house, your house, and my house can collectively come together for the common good of every man, woman, and child in this United States of America. Hopefully you've been united, and ignited to keep spreading not fear, but drop some knowledge on each other and keep sharing love, freedom, and peace. Good night.
Come on, come on. All aboard. Let me bring it down for you like that. The rhythm of love is easy to find if you're listening. The color of light isn't brown, black, or white, but it's crimson. We all bleed the same. If you don't feel the groove, it's alright. If you don't feel the groove, it's alright. You'll find it. Give a little time, y'all. All aboard, y'all. Mankind won't survive if our hearts beat inside a hateful rhythm. You see, love isn't bought, but comes with a price of forgiveness. And we all bleed the same. If you don't feel the groove, it's